Well, if you have a Bible this morning, I want to invite you to turn to the book of Luke. The book of Luke this morning, chapter number 5. We're going to be reading from there this morning as we continue on in our series called B.E.L.L.S, as we talk about service here at Sugar Grove Church of Christ, which Jay so beautifully talked about this morning during the offering. Thank you for your thoughts this morning, Jay, as he talked about giving our life away in service is just... Man, that's what happens when you get a preacher up here. Man, I just like, keep preaching, Jay. Just take it, brother. We're excited about that. Luke chapter number 5. While you're turning there, I want to say good morning to anybody who's joining us on live stream. Last week, lots of you guys commented and let us know that you were there. Please do that again this week. If you got a question we can answer for you, maybe something we could be praying for you, please do that. I know lots of people try us out kind of from a safe distance. So maybe you got some questions about Sugar Grove. We'd love to answer those for you, including my mom and dad who were in Texas yesterday in the Dallas area. So it was good to be in the same state as you guys yesterday, but they're back in Chicago this morning. And then I also want to say a special good morning this morning to Miss Kelly Taylor, our newest member here at Sugar Grove Church of Christ. She's sitting right over here. Stand up so we can cheer for you. Welcome, welcome. So glad that you're with us. So glad that you're a part of the family. And if you're a guest this morning and you're like, well, I kind of want to be a part of the family too, man, find me after the service. I'd love to answer any questions you may have, help you get connected to people like Jay, to people on our praise team, to Kelly, and kind of just let you know about what's going on here at Sugar Grove Church of Christ, because God's doing lots of really, really great things. If you don't know, if this may be your first time here in a while or first time here ever, we're kind of doing something unique as a church. We're reading through a book called Surprise the World. Now, if you have not gotten a copy of this book, I want to encourage you to go to our Welcome Center, which is on the other side of that wall right there, and pick up a copy. It's our gift to you this morning. If you want to put in a $5 donation, that's great, but you don't have to do that. It's our gift to you. I also know that we handed these books out a couple of weeks ago, so there's no doubt in my mind some of you have lost your book already. I want you to go to the Welcome Center, grab a book, but your book costs $100 because you lost the first one. But seriously, if you lost one, we got a bunch of copies in the last week, and so make sure you grab a copy. Hey, if you got a friend and you've been talking to them like, hey, we're doing this thing at church, we're reading this book by this Australian author named Surprise the World, it's kind of cool, like da-da-da-da. And they're like, well, that sounds interesting. Grab a copy for them. We'd love for you to give this book away to them as well. So each week we're kind of reading a chapter that kind of goes along with this, an acronym of B.E.L.L.S. And Michael Frost is talking about 5 kind of missional habits that we need to see developed in our lives in order to push us out onto mission in the world. These things won't just kind of happen naturally, but rather that we would begin to kind of bring some habits into our life in order that we would live what he calls a questionable life. A life where people begin to ask you, why do you live the way that you live? Why do you serve the way that you're served? And then his call to us, and I believe is so right on and straight from Paul, is that and we would be a people that would be ready to give gracious answers to those who begin to ask us, where do you get the hope that is in you? And we could begin to point them to Jesus. And these gracious answers are going to be given to questions that are asked by questionable lives. And so last week we talked about the first letter in the acronym B, which means to bless. We looked at a passage out of Acts chapter 17, because on Sunday mornings what we're kind of doing is kind of going over a little bit what you read last week, hopefully got a chance to read last week, and then as well as kind of talking about some of the lens in which we need to see the world in order to long for these habits to take place. And so in Acts chapter 17, Paul gave this great sermon about how he sees the world, and I brought the 4 main points with us this week. Here are the 4 main points from Paul's sermon that we've got to see in our own lives as we see the world. Is 1, God is the creator of all things. And then number 2, God is the sustainer of all things. He is literally sustaining all things here and now. And God has made mankind to live and to seek him. And then the really, really good news, the 4th point of Paul's sermon, was that God is not far from each of us. And if we begin to see the world as a church and as individuals in this way, then you now can't go anywhere in the world or run into anybody who has not been created by God, who is not currently being sustained by God, who God has not placed at this time and at this location that they would be seeking after him, and who do not have somewhere wired in them the longing to hear the good news that God isn't far from them. And so now you can't go to work, you can't go to the grocery store, you can't go to baseball games, you can't go anywhere without bumping into people who are longing to know the God who's not far from them. And then, man, if that doesn't compel us into service, if that doesn't compel us and push us into this idea of blessing those around us, nothing will. But if we don't have this mindset, if we don't remember these truths, if we don't remember that every single human being that we run into is created by God and being sustained by Him, we'll miss out on opportunities. We'll miss out on, we'll kind of buy into the lie that, well, like church happens at certain times or evangelism happens in certain locations. And the truth of the matter is, man, sometimes God moves really powerfully at baseball games, and sometimes God really moves powerfully at band practices and office as well. And so this is the kind of the mindset that we would begin to adopt. Now, Michael Frost, in another book that he wrote called Incarnate, he kind of talks about something interesting that I thought would be really good for us to talk about this morning when it comes to learning. He compares and contrasts two different styles of learning, and the first one, he talks about a violin maker from like the 16th, 17th century. He was this Italian guy named Antonio Stradivari. I think if you just say it with that kind of accent, then it's legit, right? Now, this guy was a really, really interesting guy. He made incredible violins. In fact, a couple of years ago, one of his original violins went on sale, and it could be yours for the cool price of $16 million. Man, I want to be friends with a guy that's like, I kind of just want to buy a violin, and I got $16 million lying around, so I'll buy that one. What's really interesting about this guy is he was half illiterate. And so he never wrote down any of the ways that he would build the violins. He never wrote it down in a manual or an instruction book. And so the way that his apprentices would learn under this guy who made incredible violins is literally by working with him. As he would grab a piece of wood and begin to examine it and see if it would fit for his violin, his apprentices would grab the same piece of wood and begin to feel if it would be the right fit. As he began to, get the strings and all kinds of other things that go into making a violin, they would do the exact same thing. And this is how his apprentices learned. They never learned by reading a manual. They never learned by reading his notes because he didn't write any down. And to this day, they still can't duplicate how perfect his violins are. I mean, they've 3D scanned it and all kinds of things. Andrew, who is our resident musician expert, is nodding his head violently right now. This is all true, right? Thank you. Later on in the service, when I talk about Jesus, nod your head the same way, okay? That was like, woo, all right, yeah. So this is incredible, right? And again, all learning with nothing written down. What Frost goes on to compare that to is a guy by the name of Albert Einstein. Many people have compared him to me, and so I kind of know him very well. And Einstein, before he was, y'all laughed way too quickly at that. Einstein, before he was famous, he went on this lecture circuit at colleges all around and was talking about this theory. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It's the general theory of relativity to model the structure of the universe as a whole. Now, I was going to explain that to you this morning, but we're running short on time. So after the service, if you're interested in that theory, come find me and I'll explain it to you because I totally get it. He gave this same lecture over and over and over again. And before the lecture circuit started, he invited one of his students to be his chauffeur. Well, after a couple of lectures and a couple more lectures and a couple more lectures, Einstein was getting quite bored. And so he and his student came up with the idea that he was going to show up at the next college, and Einstein was going to be the chauffeur, and the student would be introduced as Albert Einstein. The story goes that that's exactly what they did, and everyone bought it. The student who had heard the lecture over and over again gave a flawless lecture on this theory with Einstein sitting in the front row. Except one problem. At the very end, this particular professor in charge of this particular school does something that no one else at any of the other stops has done. This professor, at the end of Einstein's talk, says, "Does anybody have any questions?" And they open it up to a Q&A. And apparently, the first question comes, and they ask about statistical mechanics and a question about quantum theory. Again, if I had time, I'd walk you through kind of like the basics of that kind of stuff, but I just don't this morning. Einstein starts to laugh in the front row because he's been caught, right? It's over. But the student gathers himself for a second and apparently replies, this question insults my intelligence and is so easy, I'll demonstrate it to you by asking my chauffeur to answer for me. And Einstein walks up and answers the question for him. Now, two very different styles of learning, right? On one hand, you got the guy sitting with the master and doing as he does and touching what he's touching and learning by doing. And then you kind of have this guy who's just been hearing the same thing over and over and over again. And at the end of the day is able to, without really knowing anything about quantum physics or anything else that I don't even know what I said, right? He's able to give a lecture on it. The problem is with one question, right? With one question in the same field, this guy is caught to be a fraud. He's found out. Why? Because his learning has just been kind of downloading knowledge, and then he's kind of able to just spit it out. But when it comes to tangible experiences, when it comes to actually affecting his life, well, there's absolutely none of that because he's just been listening to information and is ready to spit it out. And what Michael Frost goes on to talk about is how we have got to be careful that we don't do the same thing with Jesus, right? That we don't become like the chauffeur who comes and gathers together on a Sunday morning or opens up your Bible on a Tuesday morning and gets through your quiet time and we begin to just download information. And then you're ready to kind of spit it out at times when people ask the question. But then they ask you one more question, right? They throw you a little curveball at the end of the talk. And because there's actually no tangible experience with this knowledge, it's just been kind of like things I understand. We're kind of found out to be frauds. As opposed to this understanding of sitting with the master, walking with the master, learning how he does it. There's a psychologist who calls the learning with the violins, he calls it elbow learning. And I love what he has to say about this. I think it's a good word for us this morning. He says that to learn by example is to submit to authority. You follow your master because you trust his manner of doing things, even when you cannot analyze and account in detail for its effectiveness. By watching the master and emulating his efforts in the presence of his example, the apprentice unconsciously picks up the rules of the art, including those which are not explicitly known to the master himself. These hidden rules can be assimilated only by a person who surrenders himself to that extent uncritically to the imitation of the master. And that really is the heart of our series here, that we would begin to walk with Jesus in a tangible way and begin to see what Jesus did and then emulate that in our lives here in 2017. And so, of course, it's no surprise that the first letter in the acronym is that we would be a people who bless. Because as we walk with Jesus and go with Jesus and read with Jesus and are moved by his Spirit, we constantly are seeing him be a blessing to those who he comes in contact with. And this week, I hope, is that you weren't surprised then that the next habit would be E, which is eat. Because Jesus is often eating. And I want you to see that this way of learning is an invitation that Jesus offers to any disciple that would follow him, including the disciple Peter, which we read about in Luke chapter number 5. So if you turn there, I want you to read along with me. That Jesus isn't inviting us into an intellectual ascent where we're going to have some answers memorized. Haven't really changed us, haven't really moved us in any way, but we're ready to give the answer, but rather to walk with Jesus, to work with Jesus, to see how he moves and then emulate that in our life. Here's Luke chapter number 5. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on Jesus to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets, which means the day's over, right? Fish, you actually catch a lot more fish at night. They've gone through the night. They've now taken their nets off the boat, and they're cleaning the nets to get ready for work the following day. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, Jesus asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. And when he finished speaking, which is really interesting to me, by the way, if you read a little bit in chapter 4 this week, Michael Frost talked about how oftentimes this right here, this gathering and then the singing and the sermon is kind of like the central location. And I love that Luke he just skipped over Jesus' sermon. Did you see it? Like Jesus got in the boat. He said some really incredible things, and Luke's like, that's not the point of all this. I'm going to show you what the point of all this is. And so Jesus said some great things, but let me tell you what happens afterwards. When he finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing." And there's a little bit of like, hey, listen, carpenter, I'm the professional fisherman here, and we've already tried to catch fish. It didn't go well, and to push out now would be a giant waste of time. But you are the master here, and so at your word, I'll let down the nets. Again, when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boats to come and help them. And they came and they filled up the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." Peter is the expert fisherman. Peter knows that what's going on right now, the amount of fish that are coming into the boat, this is something unlike he's ever seen. To kind of go back a little bit, you could say that Peter's a bit in awe and wonder, and he knows that a miracle is taking place. And at the sight of all this, he recognizes that Jesus isn't just master, but he's Lord. So he says to him, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were the partners with Simon. By the way, Peter's correct. Peter has correctly identified that he is a sinful man in the presence of a holy man without sin. But watch what Jesus does next. Jesus says to Simon, "Do not be afraid." And maybe you're here this morning not because of the book, not because of anything, but because you need to hear that right there. Simon, in all his sinfulness, recognizes correctly that he is unworthy to be in the very presence of the Son of God. And the Son of God doesn't say, "Your theology is correct, get out of the boat." The Son of God says to him, "Do not be afraid." And again, so often, what comes out of Christianese language is get yourself right and then you can get in the boat. And I just want you to hear this morning that if you've ever heard that, whether from a sermon or from a church or wherever, flush it. It's a lie. We worship a Jesus who, when correctly coming across a sinner in need of a Savior, he doesn't say, "Yeah, go fix yourself and then you can come follow me." Rather, he says to Peter, "Do not be afraid. You have nothing to fear, Peter." Not only that, but he then says to Peter, "From now on, you will be catching men." So not only do you not have to be afraid, but I actually want you to follow me. I want you on my team. I want you to come and do what I am going to do. And he invites Peter into the family. He gives Peter a new identity, and no longer will he be identified by the sinful man who's unworthy of being in his presence, but rather he's now a disciple of Christ. So this is the good news of our God and the love and grace that he shows. And I love, by the way, that he doesn't say to Peter, "Hey, you've correctly identified, you're going to follow me, but first I need you to go to seminary for a couple years. And you've been missing out on schooling with all the fishing that you've been doing." No, what does he say to Peter? He says, "Hey, the thing that you've been doing, you've actually been learning a lot about what it means to follow me. I just kind of want you to do it a bit differently now. You used to catch fish, and now you're going to catch men." And I wonder if there are teachers in the room that upon hearing the call from Jesus, it wouldn't be like, so drop what you're doing, go to seminary, and go work for the church, but rather like, "Hey, you used to teach for this, now I want you to teach for me." Engineers in the room, students in the room, whatever your job is, so often it's like, well, I got to quit this and so I can go work for the... No. Jesus says to Peter, you used to catch fish, now you're going to just do it a bit differently now. And then I love this, and when they brought their boats to the land, they left everything and followed him. And by everything, they left the biggest haul of fish they'd ever received. Do you know how much, you could probably buy a $16 million violin with the amount of fish they caught. And what do? They leave it. Why? Because that just pointed to the much better thing. And this is the call for you and I as well. That God's blessings, we would correctly identify them, be awe and wonder, thank you so much. But then they would ultimately point us to the Jesus who is the source of that blessing. And Peter very quickly, whatever, I'm going to follow Jesus. And I'm reminded of Paul's words. I love what Paul says to say about this in Philippians chapter 3, verse 8, because indeed I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. For his sake, I've suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ. And Peter does the same as he leaves behind the fish and quickly goes. Now, we've been talking about these habits, and again, this habit this week was eat. And so the invitation is, again, that we would begin to do as the Master does. And as if you read in the chapter, you read that Jesus oftentimes is eating. In fact, he's getting in trouble because of the kind of people that he's eating with. And I love this section on page 46 of the book that Michael Frost says this about the table, that the table ought to be the primary symbol of the Christian gathering. It represents hospitality, inclusivity, generosity, and grace. The table is the great equalizer in relationships. And when we eat together, we discover the inherent humanity of all people. We share stories, we share hopes, we share fears, we share disappointments, and people open up to each other. And we ourselves, we too get the chance to open up and share the same things, including our faith in Jesus. And when we understand that we live in a world where God has created all things and is sustaining all things, and when we understand that Jesus' invitation isn't to an intellectual assent, but rather to walking with him, we too will find ourselves eating. And I know this to be true because something very interesting in the book. Right before that, Michael Frost is giving some examples on how you and I could participate in eating. And he says this: if you want, you have 21 meals in a week, and he's asking you that you bring another person to your table for 3 of these. Or if you want to cut corners, you could bring 3 people to your table for 1 of them. And then he says your meal could be a dinner party or it could be a breakfast. And I thought to myself, well, I know some people at Sugar Grove who throw elaborate dinner parties and breakfasts. And part of the series is I want to talk to practitioners of these habits. And my hope would be that they say something that you go, ooh, I could see how this could show up in my life. And so would you guys first welcome to the stage Miss Betty Bowling. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about what it means to throw dinner parties. All right, welcome Betty to the stage, y'all. Betty, you get the nice chair. Mark, don't even think about it, all right? Yeah, you get, Mark, you can have this chair. That's the wrong one. This is for you, Betty. Betty, thank you so much for just being willing to share. I told Betty right before the service I was going to ask her to just explain the meaning of life, so go ahead, Betty. So, Betty, tell us a little bit about these dinner parties that you throw. Where did you come up with this idea? What happens at them? Just tell us a little bit about them.
When Arlie was still with us, he told me one time that we really needed to show our elders and our ministers how grateful we were for them and for their hard work and all that they have done for us. So we did. We had, I don't know, at the time, about 22, 24 for dinner. And it was wonderful.
Yeah.
I grew up with my family sharing. With 9 kids, you got to share.
Yes, ma'am.
And I had a twin sister that we shared everything. And so it was easy to think that, yeah, we need to share with these people that are so dedicated and so help us so much.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's where it started, and I love it. I love people.
Yeah.
I love having them around my kitchen table.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor for somebody to come to my house and share some coffee.
Yeah.
And by the way, my coffee's always hot for anybody that wants to come. I'm happy to have you. I don't do anything that I can't stop for somebody that wants to come by my house.
Yes, ma'am.
And I guess that's it.
I love it. I love it. Now, if for someone who hasn't been to a dinner party yet, there's no decorations. You probably don't do much planning, or am I wrong? Tell me about how do you, if you've never, I'll just spoil it. If you've never been, there's a theme, and I think the first time I was invited, you told me 2 months before the dinner when it was. So there's a lot of planning that goes into it, huh?
Yes, and it's easy. I like to cook. I'm not the best cook in the world, but
We'll talk about that.
Everybody can go out and eat.
Yeah.
But I like them to come eat my food that I cook.
Yeah.
And it's, as I say, it's an honor for me to have people in that want to share their time with me.
Yeah. Absolutely. And is that your hope? What's your hope for somebody that comes over for dinner at Betty's house?
Well, to feel welcome, for one thing, to think they're important to me, because they are.
Yeah.
And, maybe share the word with them a little bit. And I had a couple of men from there's a Mormon church right behind my house, and they came by, and they said, "Can we come in and share something?" I said, "Well, if you'll give me equal time." and so they did, and I studied the Bible, and I have for many, many years, but I'm so dumb. There's so much I don't know.
Yeah.
But I knew as much as those two boys did. and they kind of, well, we better go. Better go. They didn't feel real comfortable.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
But it's just great to have people in my house.
Absolutely.
And to share whatever I have.
Yeah.
If it's peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or if it's Chateaubriand, that doesn't matter.
That's awesome. Now, I asked Mark to come up on the stage as well, because Mark has gone to a dinner party. And so, Mark, tell us a little bit about, just what's the feeling, or what do you get from getting to go to a dinner with Betty?
Well, first of all, I think she's being a little modest. She
Very
is
modest.
Probably the best cook I know. And she has this tenderloin that melts in your mouth, and she can make new potatoes, transform them into something that is delightful. And she makes a dessert that I really like. It's called, I'll have a little bit of all of it. But no, it is a special time, because when you walk in, you feel welcomed, and you know that she's been working all day to make it special for you and everyone that's a guest there. And just really, you sit around the table, you share conversations, and just have a good time. And when you've put your feet under Betty's table, you feel like you've had a taste of heaven.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Hey, y'all, thank Betty for sharing with us this morning. Thank you, Betty. Thank you so much. I love you. What'd you do with that mic? Beautiful. All right, so maybe some of you are like, "Ooh, I've never thrown an elaborate dinner party, but I got some decorations, and I'm a pretty good cook, and there's something to that." And then some of you are like, "Oh man, that's way too fancy. I think I need something simpler." And Frost mentioned it, right? Like an elaborate dinner party, or maybe a simple breakfast. And so I'm going to talk to Joy and Buddy McVey for a second, because they throw these great Saturday morning breakfasts. And I want you to hear a little bit about them, and maybe this will give you an idea of something that you could do. So, Joy, I'm going to start with you. Tell me just a little, how did these breakfasts come about? I'll end with her too, yes, sir.
A lot of people have asked us that, and I don't think we can really put our finger on a specific time, but it sort of evolved over time. When Josh was in high school and in the youth group, I can remember several times when the youth group would be starting on a mission trip to Mexico or whatever, and we would have everybody come to our house and meet on their way out of town, and we would feed them. So that was sort of started then. And then through the years, through Josh's high school years, it wasn't uncommon for us to look up and see Cliff Oberly and Jason Reed coming through the door because they knew that breakfast was there. And so it just kind of started that way. And then the kids would come home from college or come in, and Buddy has always loved to cook and feed people. So it just grew and grew. And now we feed grandkids, and they know if they have sleepovers, the sleepovers are invited. And our little kids, it means a lot to them because they have now named Saturday breakfast Bubba's Breakfast Day.
Awesome.
And Mason has started spending the night with us on Friday night so he can be the first one there and get the first bacon because, you know, he's diabetic, and so he can have all the bacon he wants. And so he even has a special shirt that says bacon, bacon, bacon. And then the older grandkids that come in from out of town and who now have children and wives, they look forward to Saturday morning breakfast.
Yeah.
It's part of what they come to town for.
Yeah.
And it's important to them, and it means a lot to us that they have something to remember of their growing up that's really, really special.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, Buddy, I know that you've mentioned grandkids and great-grandkids, but you also have this expectation that some guests are going to show up. And in fact, you got to have a book of some kind. Tell us a little bit about if you come to a McVey or a Bubba's, what was the name of the breakfast again? Bubba's Breakfast Day. You got to sign in or something? Is that correct?
Well, if you are a guest, and sometimes we send a special invitation, sometimes they just come with other people.
There you go.
And we realized a few years ago that we were having all of these special people come over, and so Buddy thought it would be wonderful if we had a guest book for them to sign so that we could remember
awesome.
who came and who was there and when it was. And so we started having them just make a little note in this book if they came.
That's wonderful.
And but it's a very, very relaxed, come as you are. People do not have to bring anything. We cook what we cook every time, and it's usually enough.
Yeah.
And for whoever comes. And so.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you guys for sharing. Now, I asked, well, yeah, you can clap for Joy, buddy. Now, I asked one Mark about Betty's dinner, so I thought I'd ask another Mark who's been to the McVey breakfast. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about what's it like to go to a breakfast at the McVeys.
You know what? It is a great, great experience. I noticed you said right at the last, your microphone was a little bit far away, and so maybe people didn't hear. If anybody wants to come, just come on. I think we're all going to be there next Saturday, right,
That's
you
right.
guys? Next Saturday. Listen, the first time I got invited, I've been over to your house several times for a Saturday morning breakfast, and always a great experience. And the first time I was there, it was sort of like, hey, you're going to come over and be our guest for breakfast. And so I didn't know really what to expect outside. Well, we're going to eat breakfast. I knew it was going to be a great meal because I've sat at y'all's table before. I knew it was going to be super good. A couple of different kinds of gravy, bacon, several different sausages, eggs like you want them, You hear what I'm saying, y'all? I mean, it's just like all over the map. Great stuff. But you mentioned how informal it was, and it really is. All the McVeys get together on a Saturday, whether that's, as you said, that's not really a plan. It's just what happens. All of you guys. And you guys, there's more McVeys in Fort Bend County than there are ants in an anthill. I'm here to tell you right now. So it's a pretty big crowd. And very informal. Not everybody came at the same time. Some people showed up with hair curlers in their hair, and there's, house shoes on with little bunny rabbit. I'm not going to say who did that, but their initials are Patty Hatton back the last time I went. And so here's the thing that strikes me about that, and I would like for everybody really to hear this. Not so much the plan, that's just a natural rhythm of you guys, your life. Saturday morning, family gets together, come be a part of that. Some things get communicated with all of that. It's a great, great feeling to be a part of that, to be able to share in all of that. So what I just want you to know, this was way before Frost even wrote his book. If I were to come into that house, I know why you are the way that you are. I know what you believe. I know how ingrained that is in your family and in your hearts. But if I were to come to your house not knowing that, I'd be looking for an answer.
Yeah.
I'd want to know how this family came to be that way.
Yeah.
That's what that breakfast communicates. Thanks for letting me be a part of it. It's been a while since I've been there. Can I just...
All right, y'all thank Joy and Buddy one more time. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take 30 seconds, and I want you to talk to your neighbor about somebody in your life who could use an elaborate dinner or a simple breakfast. Like somebody in your life that could you to just feel loved or feel a part of something, to eat some good food, have some conversation, be able to share. There's somebody in your life, I'm telling you there is, that you know could use an elaborate dinner or a simple breakfast. I want you to take 30 seconds to talk about it, and then we'll wrap up and enter into communion. Ready? Go. Talk to your neighbor about that. Say him by name. You say me. Yeah. All right, very good. Here's what I love about that. There was talking, right? So you got somebody, or maybe you talked with your family and you all came up with the same person. There are people in your life who are longing for people who go out into the world ready to bless and ready to eat. Here's the vision. See this. Like, what if 6 months from now, what if 9 months from now, what if a year from now, I didn't interview the hosts of the breakfast or the dinner, but I interviewed some new attendees. And there were people in this room who are sitting here, and if I asked them, well, tell me how you got started, tell me how you entered into this crazy family called Sugar Grove Church of Christ, they would say, well, I got invited to a dinner. And then God seemed to do something pretty powerful through that. This is what it looks like. This is how beautiful it can be. So may we be a people that look to bless. May we be a people that look to invite people to the table, to make them feel welcome and a part, because this ultimately is what Jesus has done for us.